Hi, I'm Chuck Cantrell. I'm a father, a son, a husband, and an economist. I spent most of my career helping large corporations pivot, change, and maximize profitability. But my real passion has been economics and the study of how these systems impact the lives of all of us. Along the way, I found some data that frankly scared me. And I think it might scare you too. I've been looking at employment trends from 1974 till now, and the recessionary periods within those trends. Here's something I found. African Americans reach what we call full employment at a period just before every recessionary period since this data has been tracked. It's that point where we are fully absorbed within the labor market. Interestingly, it's not many moments that a recessionary period takes hold, and employment has to decline as companies are forced to lay off. There's a simple principle that HR uses in corporations throughout America. They call it last in, first out. On the surface, that seems fair. I mean, really, the last people in the door are probably the least experienced, the least merged into the corporation and its culture. But there's a very harsh reality, an unfair reality about this dynamic. If African Americans are the last to be absorbed within the labor force, they are the last in, and therefore, at each recessionary period, the first out. There's also an additional pressure point that happens with each of these turns for African Americans. Each time they're able to be reemployed, again, late in the business cycle, their salaries have declined. And during that period of the in-between, when they are laid off and unemployed, their savings decline as well. It's a fact of life for many of us. So when you think about that simple policy and what it means to be last in, means to be stuck within a cycle. The impacts of this for the African American community, specifically in Santa Clara County, are unduly harsh. Let's take a look at Santa Clara County. Let's look at its growth rate. It looks pretty healthy. It looks like a normal growing community that year over year builds. But let's take a step back. Let's look at African Americans within this very same community. We'll see growth until 1990, at which point the actual number, the real number of population begins to take a significant decline, a decline from which we will never recover. For the last 30 years, we have continued this slide down to the point where now African Americans represent less than 3% of the population of Santa Clara County. While at the same time, we see growth for African Americans in a different community. When you look at the percentage of African Americans within our unhoused community, we actually represent 18% in Santa Clara Valley. While at the same time, we represent less than 3% of the general population. If you look a little further, you'll find that the mortality rates in the unhoused community can reach as much as 20%. While African Americans overrepresent significantly in that population, we necessarily overrepresent in the population of the souls that perish on our streets. if we reflect on the overnight count of our unhoused population, there's a survey that goes along with it. The two things that are top in that survey that are responded to by our unhoused population are the things that impact them most, the reason they are unhoused. Number one, wages, jobs, unemployment. And number two, housing cost. The cost of housing in our valley, as we all know, has become so high that many of us can no longer afford it. If you're unemployed in this valley, you can't afford housing in this area. If you've grown to love this community as many of us have, you can't afford to leave. Unfortunately, you find home in our streets, near our streams, and in doorways. And eventually, you find death. I spent a lot of time researching this and looking at 18 points of data, looking at the impacts of that data in terms of our viability here. I didn't just do it myself. I actually employed an AI. I had it look at the same data and simply do a trend analysis and tell me, at what point will African Americans be no longer relevant statistically within our community? At which point will African Americans become extinct in Santa Clara County? 50 years. That was a generous estimate. My data independently says 35 years. This is within many of our lifetimes where we will simply perish. African Americans want nothing less, but nothing more than anyone else in this community. We want to live free. We want to live free of the constraints of our economic systems that continue to impact us so negatively, so profoundly, so consistently. So as you might think that African Americans are leaving Santa Clara County because of the suppressed income, because of obviously the housing costs, you're mistaken. We're not leaving. We're literally dying to stay here.